Beirut, Lebanon, 1979. A nightclub pulsed with music. Cigarette smoke swirled in the strobe lights, cutting through the crowd of dancers, moving to a mix of Arab pop and Western disco. At the bar sat a lone woman. Her dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and a martini glass stood untouched before her. She wore a black dress that commanded attention without effort, her posture projecting equal measures of confidence and approachability. Throughout the evening, men approached, offering drinks, conversation, the promise of something more. She smiled, deflected, waited. She was not there for any of them. 3 tables away, partially hidden by the crowd, sat Ali Hassan Mahmoud, known to Israeli intelligence as the pharmacist for his preferred method of killing. Poison delivered via food, drink, or injection. He was responsible for the deaths of at least 7 Israeli civilians and 3 Mossad operatives across Europe and the Middle East. Tonight, he sat surrounded by bodyguards who scanned the room with practiced paranoia as he conducted business with people moving weapons and money through Beirut's underworld. He did not notice the woman at the bar, did not realize she had been watching him in the mirror behind the bottles for the last 40 minutes, memorizing faces, counting exits, calculating angles. The name on her Lebanese identity card was false. It was not the name given to her by her parents in Tel Aviv 28 years earlier. Tonight, she was Nadia Khoury, a wealthy divorced socialite from a Lebanese Christian family with business interests in Paris. In truth, her name was Yael Shimoni, a Mossad operative from the Kidon unit, a department that officially did not exist, a unit that turned people into corpses when Israel's security demanded it. She had been inserted into Beirut 6 weeks prior with a mission that required something unconventional. Intelligence operations could not guarantee proximity, intimacy, the kind of access that only appears when a target believes you desire them, not their death. The operation that brought Yael to this nightclub began 18 months earlier, when Ali Hassan Mahmoud poisoned a Mossad operative named Daniel Yaram in Rome. Daniel had been tracking a weapons shipment from Libya to Gaza when someone slipped ricin into his coffee at a cafe near the Trevi Fountain. He died 3 days later in a hospital, his organs systematically failing as doctors struggled to determine the cause. By the time toxicology confirmed ricin poisoning, the killer was gone. But Italian intelligence, working with Mossad, extracted surveillance footage showing a man sitting 2 tables from Daniel, close enough to access his cup. During the brief moment, Daniel stepped away to answer a phone call. Facial recognition identified the man as Ali Hassan Mahmoud, a Palestinian operative whose dossier stretched back to the early 1970s. Mahmoud was no ordinary militant. He did not plant bombs or fire rockets. His weapon was sophistication, poisons that mimicked natural death, methods that left investigators with questions instead of evidence. He was born in Haifa in 1948. His family fled during the war for Israel's independence, ending up in a refugee camp in Lebanon, where he grew up. Surrounded by tales of lost homes and Israeli occupation, he studied chemistry at the American University of Beirut, displaying exceptional aptitude for organic chemistry and pharmacology. After graduation, he joined the Palestine Liberation Organization, not as a fighter. The PLO saw that his talents would be more valuable in covert operations than in conventional battle. Throughout the 1970s, Mahmoud worked as an assassin, eliminating targets that required stealth over spectacle. He killed an Israeli diplomat in Brussels using thallium acetate, a poison that caused the victim to lose hair and suffer organ failure over weeks, appearing like a natural illness. He eliminated a Lebanese informant working for Mossad by contaminating his digitalis medication, inducing a heart attack doctors attributed to pre-existing conditions. He poisoned a French arms dealer who supplied Israel with intelligence by adding aconitine, derived from monkshood, to his wine, causing respiratory paralysis that looked like a stroke. Israeli intelligence had repeatedly tried to eliminate Mahmoud. In 1976, a Mossad team tracked him to Athens and attempted an assassination with a car bomb, but the device detonated prematurely, killing a Greek civilian and forcing the operatives to abort. In 1977, another team located him in Beirut and planned a sniper operation, but Lebanese security forces scuttled the mission through surveillance that suggested someone had leaked operational details. Mahmoud seemed to possess an instinct for danger, frequently changed locations, trusted no one completely, and maintained operational security that frustrated even Mossad's most experienced hunters. After Daniel Yaram's death, Mossad leadership sanctioned renewed efforts to eliminate Mahmoud, dubbing it Operation Nightingale. The irony of the name reflected the poisoner's own methods, but traditional approaches had repeatedly failed. They needed something different, an operative who could personally get close to Mahmoud, close enough that his paranoia would not trigger, close enough to deliver death before he recognized danger's arrival. The concept of using female operatives for seduction-based intelligence operations was not new. Intelligence agencies worldwide had used women to exploit the vulnerabilities of male targets, using intimacy as a weapon that bypassed ordinary security measures. Mossad had employed such operations before, though always with careful weighing of risks and ethical complications. Female operatives faced dangers male agents did not. Sexual violence, the psychological trauma of prolonged intimate deception, and the possibility of pregnancy creating complications that could compromise missions or destroy cover. Yael Shimoni volunteered for Operation Nightingale, knowing exactly what it might require. She was not naive about the nature of the mission or the personal costs it might entail. Born in Tel Aviv in 1951, she grew up in the shadow of Israel's wars, understanding from childhood that national survival required sacrifices peaceful nations could not imagine. Her father was killed during the Six-Day War in 1967 when she was 16, an artillery officer whose unit was shelled during the advance on the Golan Heights. His death transformed her understanding of service from an abstraction to a personal obligation. She joined the Israel Defense Forces at 18, served in military intelligence where her language skills, she spoke Hebrew, Arabic, English, and French fluently, made her valuable for signals intelligence work. After completing mandatory service, she was recruited by Mossad and entered the organization's rigorous training program, which tested not only physical and intellectual abilities, but psychological resilience. Training was designed to break candidates, to reveal those who could maintain operations under extreme stress without compromising security or losing operational effectiveness. Yael excelled. She demonstrated exceptional compartmentalization skills, the ability to maintain cover identities without allowing the psychological blending that could reveal her true self. She could lie convincingly for extended periods, adapting her persona to operational demands without losing the boundaries of fiction. Mossad psychologists noted her capacity for emotional regulation. She could simulate intimacy, affection, even love, while maintaining an internal distance that prevented compromised judgment from genuine attachment. By 1978, she had participated in numerous operations across Europe and the Middle East, always in support roles. Surveillance, communications, document forgery. She had never killed anyone directly, though she had provided intelligence that led to eliminations carried out by other operatives. When Operation Nightingale was proposed, requiring a female operative prepared to use seduction as an operational tool, she was among 3 candidates considered. The selection process involved extensive psychological evaluation, assessing her ability to maintain intimate deception with a target she would ultimately kill, ensuring she understood the mission's requirements without illusions about what it would demand. During the final briefing before deployment, the operations commander, a seasoned Mossad officer named Avraham Cohen, was brutally frank about what might be required. This mission may require you to sleep with the target. We cannot predict what level of intimacy will be necessary to achieve operational objectives. If you are not prepared for that possibility, withdraw now without prejudice. There is no shame in acknowledging limits. Yael looked directly at him. I understand what may be necessary. The man we are targeting killed 7 Israeli civilians and 3 of our operatives. If sleeping with him gets me closer to ending his operations, then that is what I will do. My personal comfort is irrelevant when measured against the count of his victims and his future ones. Preparation for Operation Nightingale took 6 months. Transforming Yael from an Israeli intelligence officer into a Lebanese socialite required meticulous legend building that could withstand scrutiny. Mossad's identity forgery specialists created Nadia Khouri's backstory with obsessive attention to detail. A birth certificate filed in a Christian quarter of Beirut, school records from a prestigious French language academy, University transcripts from the American University of Beirut showing a literature degree. A marriage certificate documenting a short union with a wealthy Lebanese businessman who supposedly died in a car accident in 1976, explaining her financial independence and unmarried status. The financial architecture was equally thorough. Bank accounts in Beirut and Paris held funds transferred through untraceable channels, appearing as an inheritance from her late husband's import-export business. Property records showed she owned an apartment in Beirut's Atrafi district. In reality, it was a safe house maintained by Mossad through cutouts. References were created, people who would confirm acquaintance with Nadia if contacted, university friends, her late husband's business partners, all either Mossad assets or individuals whose memories had been carefully altered through staged encounters years earlier. Yale's physical transformation was subtle but significant. Her naturally dark hair was cut and styled according to Lebanese fashion trends. Her wardrobe was assembled from Beirut boutiques, authentic, not approximate. She studied the Lebanese dialect, not just Arabic, but the specific linguistic quirks of Christian Beirut, French loanwords, the intonation that marked social class and regional origin. She learned to smoke specific cigarette brands popular with Beirut's elite, drink the cocktails fashionable in nightclubs, dance with the body language of a woman comfortable in such settings. Most importantly, she studied Ali Hassan Mahmoud. Mossad provided everything it knew about him: his movements, his associates, his habits. He frequented certain nightclubs in West Beirut, preferring establishments that catered to the city's cosmopolitan elite rather than revolutionary militants. He drank Johnny Walker Black Label, always with ice. He enjoyed French cuisine and collected vintage watches. He had relationships with several women, but maintained no permanent partner. His paranoia prevented long-term intimacy that could make him vulnerable. A psychological profile developed by Mossad analysts suggested Mahmoud possessed classic narcissistic traits combined with deep-seated suspicion. He craved admiration and status, enjoying the company of beautiful women who boosted his self-esteem, but trusting no one completely. His relationships were transactional. He provided money, gifts, and access to elite circles. Women provided companionship and validation. He was attracted to sophistication over mere beauty, preferring women who could engage him intellectually, who appeared independent rather than desperately needy. This profile shaped Yale's operational approach. She would not throw herself at Mahmoud, would not appear too available or too eager. Instead, she would position herself within his orbit, visible but not pursuing, creating circumstances where he would approach her, not the other way around. The strategy leveraged his narcissism. A beautiful, sophisticated woman who seemed unimpressed by him would present a challenge his ego would compel him to pursue. Yale entered Beirut in March 1979, traveling via Cyprus using Nadia Khouri's Lebanese passport. She settled into the Atrafi apartment, spending the first weeks simply living her cover identity, shopping, dining, attending cultural events. She made no attempt to contact the target or gather intelligence, focusing entirely on becoming Nadia Khouri so completely that the performance dissolved into reality. Mossad operatives monitored her progress through surveillance and periodic covert contacts, short meetings in public places where coded messages were exchanged without appearing to communicate. Her first direct observation of Mahmoud occurred in April at a gallery opening in Hamra, West Beirut's cultural district. He was present with 2 bodyguards and a young woman who appeared to be his current companion, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone accustomed to being noticed. Yale watched from the other end of the room, noting his interactions, his body language, how he dominated conversations while scanning his surroundings with habitual vigilance. She made no attempt to approach or attract his attention, merely gathering intelligence on his behavior in social settings. A second observation was at a restaurant 2 weeks later. Mahmoud was dining with business partners, discussing what appeared to be logistical arrangements, containers, delivery schedules, money transfers. Yale sat 3 tables away with a Mossad operative posing as a French businessman. Their conversation in French was just loud enough to be overheard. She noticed Mahmoud glancing at their table several times. His attention was drawn by her appearance and the sophisticated European aura they projected. A third encounter was staged. Mossad surveillance revealed Mahmoud often visited the caves du Roi, a nightclub popular with Beirut's affluent elite. Intelligence suggested he visited most Thursday evenings, usually arriving around midnight. On the third Thursday of May, Yale took a seat at the bar, arriving at 11:30 to establish her presence before Mahmoud's expected appearance. She wore a black dress that was elegant rather than provocative, jewelry that suggested wealth without ostentation, and maintained the demeanor of a woman comfortable alone in public. Confident, self-sufficient, needing nothing from anyone. Mahmoud arrived at 12:15 with his usual security. He immediately scanned the room upon entering, a professional assessment of threats and opportunities. His gaze slid over Yale, returned, lingered. She did not react, did not meet his gaze, seemed absorbed in her own thoughts. The lack of reaction provoked precisely the response Mossad's psychological profile predicted. His interest heightened because she seemed indifferent to his presence. He remained at his table for 40 minutes, conducting business, but his attention periodically returned to the woman at the bar who had not once looked his way. Finally, he stood and approached. Yale felt his movement in her peripheral vision, but waited until he was directly beside her before acknowledging his presence with a glance that was polite but unencouraging. "You look too sophisticated for this place," Mahmoud said in French. His opening line was calculated to flatter, while establishing a linguistic common ground that suggested education and cosmopolitan identity. Yale turned to him with an expression registering moderate interest without enthusiasm. Her French was flawless. Her tone suggested someone accustomed to better places elsewhere. It was a statement, not a question. His assessment was based on her manner and bearing. "My passport suggests otherwise, though I spent years in Paris." She delivered the line with slight disdain, implying Beirut's limitations without explicit criticism. Mahmoud nodded to the bartender, ordering a Johnny Walker, sitting on a stool beside her without invitation. A display of dominance Yale permitted without objection, but also without welcoming encouragement. She provided an explanation without detail, maintaining a boundary between polite conversation and genuine engagement. They talked for 30 minutes. Mahmoud asked questions designed to assess her background and circumstances. Yale gave answers consistent with her cover identity while revealing little emotional content. She mentioned studying literature at AUB, her short marriage to a businessman who died young, her preference for Paris over Beirut. She asked nothing about him, which visibly frustrated and intrigued him simultaneously. Beautiful women in nightclubs usually wanted to know about powerful men, but she seemed genuinely uninterested in his status or connections. When Mahmoud proposed dinner the following evening, Yale hesitated noticeably before agreeing. Her body language suggested she was yielding to a social obligation rather than accepting with enthusiasm. The calculated reluctance amplified his pursuit exactly as Mossad's strategy predicted. They exchanged phone numbers. Yale provided a number to a secure line routed through a safe house. And she left soon after, leaving him at the bar rather than prolonging the encounter. Dinner took place at El Earl, a French restaurant in East Beirut that catered to the city's Christian elite and foreign expatriates. Mahmoud arrived without visible security, though Mossad surveillance identified 2 bodyguards positioned outside. Yale was dressed elegantly but conservatively, maintaining the image of a sophisticated woman, not an available companion. Conversation over wine and cassoulet covered literature, politics, and Lebanese society. Yale revealed enough personality to be interesting, while maintaining the emotional distance that prevented genuine intimacy. Mahmoud clearly tried to impress her, discussing his business interests in deliberately vague terms that suggested importance without specifics, mentioning trips to European capitals and relationships with influential people. Yale responded with polite interest but without admiration, treating his achievements as ordinary rather than exceptional. The strategy worked precisely because it violated his expectation. Most women reacted to his wealth and status with admiration that fed his narcissism. Her seeming indifference created a psychological tension that made her more, not less, desirable. At the evening's end, when Mahmoud suggested continuing the night at his apartment, Yale declined with a smile that was warm but firm. "I enjoyed dinner, but I am not one who moves to intimacy quickly." She allowed him to kiss her cheek before departing in a taxi, leaving him outside the restaurant with an expression captured by surveillance cameras. frustration mixed with determination, the look of a man unaccustomed to refusal and resolved to overcome it. Over the next month, the relationship developed through calculated pacing. Dinners each week, always at Yale's agreement, not her initiative, maintaining the dynamic where he pursued while she remained slightly out of reach. She permitted gradual escalation, holding hands during walks along the Corniche, accepting his arm when they attended a concert, allowing longer kisses when he drove her home. But she continued to decline invitations to his apartment, maintaining boundaries that amplified rather than diminished his interest. Mossad operatives monitored the operation's progress through surveillance, and Yale's coded reports transmitted during short contacts in public places. The strategy was succeeding. Mahmoud was increasingly invested in the relationship. His focus was on overcoming Yale's resistance, not on challenging her identity. Security checks were conducted. Phone calls were made to verify her biography, but the cover identity held because Mossad had spent months creating documentation and references that withstood investigation. The psychological strain on Yale was significant, though carefully managed. Living as Nadia Khoury required constant performance, maintaining character even in private moments because surveillance was always possible. Kissing Mahmoud, accepting his touches, simulating attraction to a man she intended to kill created cognitive dissonance that required extraordinary compartmentalization. Mossad psychologists had prepared her for this through training that taught emotional regulation techniques, mental practices that allowed her to separate operational requirements from personal feelings, to experience physical intimacy while maintaining internal distance. But theory differed from practice. Yale found herself wrestling with unexpected reactions, moments when Mahmoud said something genuinely interesting or displayed vulnerability that made him seem human rather than a target. She recognized these reactions as dangerous signs that genuine feelings could develop, which might compromise operational judgment. During one contact with her handler, she confessed unease about her emotional state. The handler, a woman named Rachel who had conducted similar operations years earlier, reassured her that such feelings were normal and manageable. You are not falling in love with him. You are reacting to intimacy because humans are wired to connect through physical contact. Your training is working. You recognize the feeling as problematic, which means you maintain the necessary separation. Rachel's assessment was clinical but comforting, reframing Yale's doubts as evidence of professional competence, not failure. In early July, Yale judged sufficient foundation had been established. She allowed Mahmoud to persuade her to spend a weekend at a mountain resort outside Beirut, ostensibly under the chaperonage of other couples, but providing opportunity for greater intimacy. The resort was luxurious by Lebanese standards, a converted Ottoman mansion overlooking cedar forests, far from Beirut's violence and political tensions. They had adjoining rooms, an arrangement suggesting intimacy while maintaining plausible deniability. The first evening, after dinner and wine, Mahmoud came to her room. What followed was the consummation Mossad had anticipated as possibly necessary in operational planning. Yale allowed sexual contact to proceed. Her performance was convincing because she had trained specifically for this scenario, responding physically while maintaining psychological distance, simulating pleasure and connection while remaining internally detached. The compartmentalization was not perfect. Physical intimacy created emotional reactions training could moderate but not eliminate, but she maintained the deception. And Mahmoud believed her reactions were genuine, because narcissism predisposed him to believe any woman would find him desirable. What Mahmoud did not know was that Yale used the opportunity to conduct operational tasks invisible to him. While he slept afterward, she photographed documents in his briefcase using a miniature camera concealed in her cosmetic case. She noted phone numbers written in a notebook, memorizing them for transmission to Mossad. She observed his habits, that he took medication before bed, that he locked his briefcase but left the key in his jacket pocket, that he was a heavy sleeper who did not wake easily. The weekend established a new stage in their relationship. They became what appeared to be a couple, regularly seen together at restaurants and social events. Mahmoud introduced her to associates as his companion. Introduction to his social circle provided Yale access to intelligence beyond Mahmoud himself. Conversations with his business partners revealed details about weapons smuggling networks. Meetings with PLO operatives revealed command structures and operational planning. Social gatherings included discussion of recent operations and future targets. Yale continuously transmitted intelligence through coded messages using dead drops at Beirut locations controlled by Mossad assets. The intelligence was valuable information on PLO infrastructure in Lebanon, details on weapons shipments from Libya and Syria, identification of operatives and their assignments. But the primary mission remained unchanged: eliminate Ali Hassan Mahmoud. The question was method and timing. Traditional assassination approaches, a car bomb, a sniper, poison, carried significant risks in Beirut's security environment, where Mahmoud maintained protective measures and operated within networks that would thoroughly investigate his death. But Yale's intimate access created opportunities an external operation could not achieve. If Mahmoud died while they were together, under circumstances that appeared natural or accidental, her presence could deflect rather than attract suspicion. A tragic accident, a sudden illness, something Lebanese authorities would classify as misfortune, not murder. Mossad planners developed a specific protocol. They provided Yale with a poison, dimethylmercury, delivered via a dead drop in a medicine bottle labeled as prescription antibiotics. The poison was extremely toxic, requiring only microscopic exposure to cause fatal mercury poisoning. Symptoms would develop over hours or days, initially mimicking flu before progressing to neurological damage and organ failure. Death would appear to result from natural causes or possibly accidental environmental toxin exposure, not murder by someone who spent the evening with him. The delivery method was critical. Yale could not directly introduce poison via food or drink without risk of detection or exposure to herself. Instead, the plan was contact poisoning, applying minute amounts to objects Mahmoud would touch repeatedly. His watch, his phone case, his car keys. Absorbed through the skin over hours of contact, the poison would deliver a lethal dose without leaving evidence of deliberate administration. On August 14, 1979, Yale initiated the final phase. She suggested to Mahmoud they spend the evening at her apartment instead of going out, a change in their usual pattern he accepted with enthusiasm, interpreting it as increased intimacy and trust. He arrived at 8 p.m., bringing champagne and flowers. His mood was upbeat and relaxed. They dined on a meal Yale prepared, nothing elaborate, pasta and salad with wine, food that seemed casual and unscripted rather than staged. After dinner, while Mahmoud stepped onto the balcony to smoke, Yale retrieved the medicine bottle from her bathroom. Using gloves she immediately discarded, she applied microscopic amounts of poison to the band of his watch and the case of his phone, both of which he had left on the coffee table. The quantity was precisely measured, enough to be lethal, but not so much as to be visible or detectable by touch. She completed the application in under 30 seconds, discarded the gloves in a trash bag that would be immediately removed from the apartment, and returned to the living room before Mahmoud came back inside. They spent the next several hours together, talking and eventually moving to the bedroom, where the intimacy they had established over months continued. Mahmoud repeatedly touched his watch and phone throughout the evening and night. Each contact transferred invisible amounts of poison through his skin into his bloodstream. The poison began its work immediately, though symptoms would only manifest hours later. Mahmoud left the apartment at 2 a.m., driving himself because Yale suggested he leave to avoid complicating her reputation. Neighbors in her building might gossip about men staying overnight. He kissed her goodbye, promised to call in the morning, and departed in good spirits, unaware he had been exposed to a toxin already beginning to disrupt cellular function throughout his body. Yale immediately initiated the evacuation protocol. She packed one bag with essentials, wiped fingerprints from the apartment though she had lived there for months, and exited via a service entrance surveillance had confirmed as unwatched. A Mossad driver picked her up 3 blocks away and drove her to a safe house in the mountains east of Beirut, where she remained while the operation's outcome unfolded. Mahmoud began feeling ill around 6 a.m. Nausea, headache, mild confusion he attributed to too much wine and too little sleep. By noon, symptoms intensified: severe headache, blurred vision, difficulty with coordination. He called his doctor, who suggested he come to a private clinic for examination. By the time he arrived at 3 p.m., his condition had significantly deteriorated: tremors, slurred speech, ataxia. The doctor immediately hospitalized him, suspecting a stroke or cerebral hemorrhage. Lebanese medical facilities in 1979 lacked sophisticated toxicology capabilities. Doctors ran standard tests, blood work, a CT scan of his brain, finding abnormalities that suggested neurological damage but no clear cause. They treated him for a presumed stroke with supportive therapy, but his condition continued to worsen. By evening, he was semi-conscious. His kidneys were failing. Liver enzyme levels indicated severe damage. By midnight, he was on life support. Mahmoud died at 4:17 a.m. on August 15, less than 26 hours after leaving Yale's apartment. The official cause of death listed on his certificate was acute encephalopathy of unknown origin, medical terminology for brain failure without established cause. An autopsy was performed, but the pathologist found no obvious injury or illness to explain the sudden collapse. Blood tests showed elevated mercury levels, but the physician attributed this to possible environmental exposure rather than poisoning. Noting mercury contamination was not uncommon in Beirut, given the city's industrial pollution and aging infrastructure. The investigation into Mahmoud's death was limited. He was a covert operative whose real activities were known only to PLO leadership. Lebanese authorities classified his death as natural causes, possibly related to environmental toxins or an undiagnosed medical condition. The PLO conducted its own investigation, interviewing associates and reconstructing his final days. They interviewed Yale, who expressed shock and grief over his death, explaining they had spent the previous evening together and he had seemed perfectly healthy when he left. Nothing in her behavior or her apartment suggested anything suspicious. The investigation concluded without identifying assassination. Lebanese security services had no reason to suspect Israeli involvement because the operation was conducted with such stealth that no evidence pointed to intelligence activity. Mahmoud's death looked tragic but natural, possibly caused by mercury exposure from an unknown source, perhaps industrial pollution, perhaps accidental contact with materials through his business dealings. Yale remained in Lebanon another week, maintaining her cover as Nadia Khoury and appearing to grieve Mahmoud's death with appropriate sorrow. She attended a memorial service, expressed condolences to his family, and behaved precisely as a woman who had unexpectedly lost her lover would. Only after Lebanese authorities and PLO investigators concluded their inquiries did she begin evacuation. Evacuation was gradual, not immediate, designed to avoid suspicion that might arise from sudden departure. Nadia Khoury announced to friends and acquaintances she was returning to Paris, that Mahmoud's death had reminded her of her late husband's passing, and it was too painful to remain in Beirut. She closed her apartment, settled affairs with an air of finality, and flew out through Beirut airport using her Lebanese passport, bound for Paris, where she would disappear into Mossad-maintained safe houses. Once in Paris, Yale underwent extensive debriefing. Intelligence handlers conducted detailed interviews about every aspect of the operation. What had she learned about Mahmoud and his networks? What intelligence had she gathered on PLO operations? How was the assassination executed? Had any complications arisen that might threaten operational security? Simultaneously, psychologists assessed her mental state, evaluating whether the operation's demands had caused psychological damage requiring treatment. The debriefing revealed Yale had sustained significant psychological impact, though not in a way that indicated operational failure. She described emotional difficulty with the deception of intimacy, acknowledging that simulating affection for someone she intended to kill created moral unease for which training had not fully prepared her. She expressed no regret over Mahmoud's death. His operational history justified elimination in her assessment, but felt troubled by the manipulation of intimacy as a weapon, the use of physical relationship as a mechanism for killing. Mossad psychologists recognized these reactions as ethically complex, not problematic. Yale was not suffering trauma that would impair future operations, but rather demonstrating moral awareness that prevented the complete dehumanization that sometimes afflicted operatives who repeatedly carried out killings. They recommended extended leave and ongoing counseling, but assessed her as psychologically stable and capable of continued service should she choose it. Operation Nightingale was classified as successful. Mahmoud was eliminated without revealing Israeli involvement. His death created an operational gap in the PLO's covert capabilities that would take months to fill. The intelligence Yale gathered during the operation provided valuable insights into PLO networks and operations that informed subsequent Israeli actions. The operation demonstrated that sophisticated tradecraft combined with psychological understanding could achieve objectives conventional approaches had failed to accomplish. But the operation also highlighted ethical complexities intelligence agencies rarely acknowledge publicly. Yale volunteered for a mission that required using intimacy as a weapon, accepting that eliminating a threat justified personal costs and moral compromises. Was that choice heroic or tragic? Did successfully eliminating a person responsible for multiple deaths justify the psychological burden placed on the operative who carried it out? Intelligence agencies answer such questions through operational necessity. The mission succeeded, therefore the methods were justified, but individual operatives must reconcile those answers with personal moral frameworks that may reach different conclusions. Yale continued working for Mossad another 5 years, participating in additional operations that required her specific skills in languages and cultural navigation. But she never accepted another mission based on seduction, requesting assignments that did not require intimate deception. In 1984, she left operational work, transitioning to analytical roles where her experience informed intelligence assessments without requiring field deployment. She eventually married and had children, building a civilian life entirely separate from her intelligence past. She rarely discussed Operation Nightingale, even in secure settings where operational security did not preclude conversation. When asked about it during a historical debriefing years after the operation was partially declassified for internal training purposes, she said something that reflected the moral ambiguity inherent in such work. "I do not regret what I did. Mahmoud was a killer who would have continued killing had we not stopped him. But I also cannot forget that stopping him required becoming someone I hope I am not. Someone who could simulate love while planning a murder. That contradiction does not resolve." The nightclub in Beirut, where Yale first approached Mahmoud, is now gone, destroyed during the Lebanese civil war that consumed the country throughout the 1980s. The apartment where she lived as Nadia Khouri was damaged by shelling and later rebuilt, without memory of what occurred there. People who knew Nadia have no idea the sophisticated Lebanese socialite was an Israeli intelligence operative who disappeared after her lover's mysterious death. Only in classified archives does the truth remain. Operational reports, interrogation transcripts, psychological assessments documenting how one woman was sent into a Beirut nightclub to hunt a killer using a weapon more intimate and morally complex than bullets or bombs. The operation succeeded because Yale Shimoni was willing to accept costs others might refuse, to use her body and simulated emotions as tools in service of operational objectives, to temporarily become who she was not to accomplish what she believed necessary. Was that sacrifice justified? It remains a question without a convenient answer. Intelligence agencies measure success in eliminated threats and gathered intelligence. Operatives measure the cost through psychological burdens and moral compromises that outlive any single mission. Both assessments are true, both incomplete. Reality exists in the space between them, a place where necessity collides with conscience and where choices made in shadow create consequences that last far longer than the operations that required them. If you found this exploration of covert operations and their human cost compelling, please like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into untold histories, and share it with others who appreciate complex narratives from the world of intelligence space between them. A place where necessity collides with conscience and where choices made in shadow create consequences that last far longer than the operations that required them. If you found this exploration of covert operations and their human cost compelling, please like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into untold histories, and share it with others who appreciate complex narratives from the world of intelligence.